All right, so hey everyone, welcome to the Vienna Whyte Roundtable Season 1. We are on episode 2. I'm your host, Millie Rouge, and today we have our guests, Drew from FKB.
Hi.
Beautiful. Oh, it didn't pick up on your face. Say hi again.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Beautiful, there you are. And our second guest today, which is the lovely
Nolia Jarvis.
There she is.
Hi, guys.
Beautiful. Now you guys know what their faces look like. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for being on today. So I kind of went over the process of how today will go down. But again, we want you guys to respond and engage with whatever resonates with you today that we talk about. The more the better, so don't feel like you have a time limit of how long you need to talk or anything. So today's topic that we are going to chat about is musical journeys. Now this topic can be kind of broad, but as I was saying to these guys before the stream started, I'm super excited to have both of their experiences on board today because they both have quite different experiences. So I think this will really give a good kind of different aspect on how musical journeys kind of become to be and how they get to where they are today. So firstly, I just like to go around to begin and just give a little introduction. I know Drew was on our first episode, but we're going to introduce him again because why the heck not? And just give an introduction to all the guests of what musical act you're from, your stage name, or whatever group you're with, and just tell us a little bit about what you do. So let's just start off with Drew.
Hi, my name is Drew Shalka. I play in the alternative rock band FKB. We're based in Edmonton, and we've been touring a bunch over the last several years. And I've also co-written some songs I co-wrote one with Nolia Charles 2 years ago called Danger. It was on her Juno-nominated album Distant Danger. And I've also been writing with Dan Davis and Clayton Bellamy on FKB stuff as well.
Beautiful. All right, guest number 2, Nolia, you're up.
All right, so I'm Nolia Jarvis. I'm 17, and yeah, I'm definitely more new to the music world. For the past few years, I've been playing publicly in different shows. I did a lot of competitions growing up since I was about 13. And I'm also involved in the musical theater world, so I've been in quite a few theater shows throughout my high school career. And yeah, now I'm just getting ready to see what music's going to look like once I graduate high school.
Exactly. Beautiful. And Nolia, I have a random question for you. Have you started your online schooling yet?
Yes, I have. I started it last week.
Beautiful. And how is that feeling
Yeah,
so
it's
far?
been
I know it's different.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's almost hard to get motivated knowing that we're not going to have like diplomas or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just getting it done. At least like I'm in it with my friends. We're all in it together, so
Right.
making the best of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen so many things online of people like trolling their teachers, and so I hope the teachers are bearing
Yeah.
through it. I don't know if you've experienced that as of yet, but that's what I've seen online. I feel like that's mostly from the States, to be honest, but I don't think most Canadian schools are like that. Mostly just the States, I think, for sure. Cool. Well, thank you guys for sharing. So we're going to dive into the first topic, which is musical journeys. So I kind of want to get your guys' feedback on what skill sets do you think someone has to have in order to be a musician? And I guess I should say successful musician, because I think a lot of people think that they can kind of just whip out the musician thing out of nowhere and just kind of give
Sorry,
it
I think it's just freezing up a bit.
Oh, all good. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it lagging on you? Okay, no worries. I'll repeat it again. No worries. It's the internet, so it's definitely expected to happen. So what skill sets do you think someone has to have to be a musician? So I know a lot of people sometimes will just jump into music, kind of like, I don't want to say a lot, but there are a few that will just willy-nilly kind of jump into it, not really knowing what skill sets they have to have previously to be a musician. So what do you guys think are some skills that you would have to have in order to be a good musician?
I think you have to be a self-starter. Like, I think you have to be very self-motivated is a big one, because it's really hard to, if you don't have the drive and ability to like set your own deadlines and start projects on your own, it gets really hard to actually accomplish things, because there's no one who's going to tell you that you need to accomplish this by this date, or that these are your factors of success. Like, I think being very self-motivated is a really, really big one.
Totally.
Yeah. For sure.
I think
I agree
too,
with that, because like, how are you going to improve if you're not self-motivated as well? So that's probably one of the biggest parts of being a musician, I think.
totally.
And sometimes it can...
Oh, I'm losing you, Nolia. Come back. Oh, there you are. Are you there, Nolia? Did I lose you? I think she's frozen on me. Oh no. Okay, hold on. I don't usually have this issue, people not being here. Okay, I'm gonna try kicking you out for a second, Nolia, and bringing you back in. Oh. Da, da, da.
Hello?
Hey, you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I
You
don't know what
froze. I don't
happened.
know. That's okay. No
Yeah,
worries. We'll just pick up kind of where you left off.
Okay. Where we? And then it kicked me out of the meeting.
That's okay. You might just have like a weaker Wi-Fi, and it might just be not having a good time with that. That's my only
Maybe.
thing I could think of. If you have any other like phones that are on Wi-Fi or like devices, I would maybe just switch them off. But
Okay.
that's my only guess to the internet.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll just keep moving along. But sorry about that, Nolia. Hopefully it
That's
works
okay.
from here on out.
Yes.
I think that's so true, because I think a lot of musicians, they tend to kind of have this goal in mind that they want to make an EP or they want to make an album. But I think they really lack kind of that motivation of when that's going to be. I know a lot of people are kind of like, oh, well, like at some point or like one day, and they don't really have like a set. I think really giving yourself set goals, like you were saying, Drew, it really helps to like establish that, yes, this is for sure happening. I've told people this, and this is going to happen no matter what, right? So I think that really does set someone apart from one another, because it really shows that they're willing to get it done and not kind of BS their way through it.
Yeah.
if you will, I guess. But how do you find, Nolia, with being like a younger artist and your goals? Because I know when you're a little bit older, you kind of teach yourself to be more scheduled and like be more like, I guess, like willing to get your goals done. How do you find it being, because you are younger? I'm curious to know like how you feel with goal setting and how it kind of feels to do that.
Okay. Sorry, it cut out a bit again, but I think I got what you were saying. So just like,
Okay.
how is it different, like as you're younger with setting goals? Was that kind
Yeah,
of the
like, do you
gist?
find it's harder at the age you're at now, because you're kind of new to this game? Like, do you find it harder to set goals for yourself, or do you find it's more helpful when you set goals? Like, kind of how do you feel with goal setting with music in general?
Yeah, I'm honestly I've been pretty bad with that, like setting strict goals. So in these past few months, like as I've realized, okay, yeah, you're actually going to be leaving school soon. You should really be making plans. I've definitely been focusing more on trying to figure out what I want to do, like even with schooling, whether I want to take a gap year and really focus on music. So yeah, during school, it was definitely hard to set goals, but now I'm kind of bearing down like, okay, what do you want to do? When are you going to do it?
Yeah, totally. And I think grade 12 year is definitely that year that happens for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Maybe Drew and I could give you some tips or some advice. I don't know if you have anything, Drew, for her that maybe we could
Yeah.
pass along as
I do.
our wisdom to her. Yeah, you can go first, Drew, if you want.
I think like a lot of stuff, don't worry about if you're not as organized as you think you should be. Like, I was terrible with stuff when I was just getting out of school, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s like that I would say I was in a position, like my band's been together for 10 years, and it wasn't until probably the last four years that we really had things together. But that was mainly an age thing, because we started it when I was 14 years old. So For those first few years, we were just high school kids, and
Yeah.
we're more organized than most, but we didn't have that like organization that came later. But I mean, you can do the best you can and try and figure things out and try and put stuff together. But a lot of stuff just comes with time, and it's not a big deal if it's not coming right away, and if things aren't as together as you think they should be just yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that, because I think obviously there's days I still struggle myself as an artist with motivation and just like keeping up with my goals. But I think it is really true, like the age thing. It just kind of, there is a point where you hit a certain age. I don't really know what age it is, because it is different for everybody. But there is a certain point in your life where you're just like, okay, I need to stop doing this. I need to just take it more seriously. And I think it just, like Drew said, it just naturally kind of falls. And I don't think there's anything wrong if it takes a while for you to get there. And as long as, like he said, you're continuing to try and you're just putting yourself out there where you can and where you find it feasible, then it'll eventually just click. And but I think it's really awesome. I know you as an artist and a performer at your age, you're already miles ahead of where I used to be. So you're in very good hands. So as long as you keep up the good work, I'm sure you'll be just fine. So
Thanks.
Thank you guys for that. What are the steps that you guys took to get to the music levels that you are at right now? Whether that's your beginner stage or your advanced stage, what are some of the steps that you took that maybe you could recommend to like an average Joe who wants to kind of know how do they get from point A to point B?
Okay. Well, I haven't like gotten that far, right? But what I would say is that the main thing that I've focused on the past few years is just getting better at the craft, right? So every day I've just been playing guitar, learning new chords, learning new strumming patterns. Taking vocal lessons, I think, is very important, maintaining vocal health, learning different vocal techniques, because that was definitely a huge part of me starting out singing. But like career-wise, I think I need to hear what you guys have to say on that, because I'm, again, not very far into that.
No, that totally makes sense. What do you think, Drew, for yourself?
Well, I think I agree with 100% with the get the craft down first, because if you don't know what you're doing, in terms of like if you go out there and are just really sloppy in terms of performance and the craft, it could set a bad name and make it hard to continue on. So you don't want to step out before you're ready, but at the same time, I think a lot of people get hung up on when they think they're ready to take that next jump. And for us, what we really did was we got the craft down. Like we got, I guess not down as much as we got proficient enough that we could go out and get on the road, book performances, and just kind of take that leap and just jump into it. And I think that's the next step that you have to do once the craft is done. You just have to jump in and start doing whatever you can do. And if you've done your work properly in the beginning and it's entertaining and it sounds good, then the rest should fall into place. And there's a certain amount of the craft that I think comes from just jumping into it as well. And then on top of that, I think just being a pleasant person to be around and being not causing trouble when you go out and start doing things. Just being someone that people like to work with and would want to have back, I think goes such a long way as well.
Totally. Yeah. I really agree with that. I think, I really like the point that you mentioned where you said, there's a point to like perfecting your craft and doing all that, but there is a point where you just have to start jumping into things and not letting like the fear of like, oh, well, I really one day want to apply for this grant. Like, it's like, well, why can't you just do it now? Like, what is the fear that holds you back? And I think for me, I definitely face that a lot. There's this fear of like, and it's kind of pretty dumb, to be honest, because that's the only way that artists will break from that bubble of being just a local artist or just the average whatever singer. Like, I think if you really push yourself and you don't care, which is like in a good way, not care, it can really go a long way for sure. And I know like with my recent project with Marissa, it's definitely a lot easier like to have someone else there with you. Like, I know when you have a band, it's easier to fall back on people, and kind of when you're pushing through these things together, you guys are pushing through it together, not alone, right? So I know for Nolia, it is a bit harder to push when you're by yourself, right? There's more fears and your mind can kind of take over sometimes and be like, But I think you've got a good support system. Like I know your mom's really supportive of the stuff that you do, and she's really helpful. So I think you've got a good kind of momager, which is, I think a lot of people, they need a momager or like a friendager because they need someone to help push them for sure. I was curious to ask Drew, I've noticed in your live performances with FKB, you guys are almost like everything's in sync. Your dance moves, well, they're not really dance moves, but like your stage moves and like how you guys blend together as a band is really like, that's the thing that just every time I watch you guys, I'm like, holy crap, like that is so good. Like you guys are professional. How long did that take to get to that point? Like, was there a lot of practicing involved? And if there was, how many times were you guys practicing that, like maybe per week, or how often?
Well, thank you for saying that you enjoy that. Yeah, it takes a lot of practice to get that in. So like I said, we've been playing for 10 years, and we started out doing a lot of like, because we were in high school, we started out doing a lot of like corporate private parties and stuff like that. So we learned by imitating. So we would imitate the Beatles, we would imitate Elvis. Like we would take things from shows that we liked. But the way that our show is now that you're seeing these days, that was kind of put together when we did our first nationwide tour, and that took about 2 months of, and that was the original incarnation. Like even what there is now is a lot different from that was, but that took about 2 months of, I'm trying to remember how much we rehearsed. I know different members of the band would meet. So oftentimes there'd only be 3 of us putting it together out of the 4, but typically we would be in there from about 7 p.m. till 4 in the morning some nights, and we would run the show over and over again. We'd run specific sections over and over again. And then that got better as we took it on the road. Like a lot of things weren't quite right about it when we did it that first time, but that got better that first tour. And then when our most recent member joined us, Alex, he joined us in early 2017. We would meet up 3 nights a week, and we would practice. We were all in school at the time, so we would meet at about 6 p.m. after everyone was done classes, and we'd rehearse until 2 in the morning, about 3 nights a week.
Nice. That is crazy.
So we had to teach him all the songs, and then we added, because he was a dancer, so we added even more like choreography to it. And
was Alex a dancer? Sorry.
He was a Ukrainian dancer before.
Okay, that makes so much sense. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, so it worked out. He helped us make it not look as robotic and try and make things look natural. And we just kind of kept adding. We always keep adding things now, like, but that also, once again, when we started doing that particular tour, that got a lot better when we went to it was about when we got back from the US, I think, that we really noticed that our show had gotten better. And that was just, there's only so much you can do in a rehearsal, and then the rest of it is just doing like 40 shows back to back to back.
Right.
And that's where
just repetition almost.
Yeah.
I feel
and that's where it starts to look really natural, and like you're not thinking about it. And that's where it gets its flow, I would say, is from the performance of it.
Totally. And Nolia, I'm curious to see, like, because I know you have a bit of musical theater background. Do you find they have the same intensity almost as like Drew mentioned, with like the rehearsals and the practicing and the dancing and the singing part? Like, how would you compare that?
Yeah, definitely. Like the show that I was doing this semester, it got canceled because of COVID. But the show, like, we had rehearsals. It was like a class. So every single day, 5 days a week, we would have not as long of hours, but about an hour and a half of practice time, and they'd be scheduled choreography, dance day, music day, blocking, and acting day. So yeah, it's a lot just putting the show together. And yeah, I totally agree with repetition. That's how it gets better. Once you learn it, we just kept repeating it, and then it just becomes like, almost muscle memory, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really cool. Yeah, totally. I think it's a really cool contrast to talk about musical theater compared to live band performance shows. And I think a lot of bands, if they could take almost like a course in movement or like stage blocking, it would be super helpful. I think someone needs to jump on that. I think, Drew, you should start that up. Start charging for it.
And that's another big influence is I love Broadway shows, and that we can't take a lot of elements from Broadway into our show because we don't have the production, we don't have the budget, but like just a lot of like little ideas we'll get from random things, like a musical will give great ideas. Those are very well put together shows.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite musicals that you like, Drew?
Yeah, Jersey Boys is my all-time favorite.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
What about yours, Nolia? What would you say your favorite musical is?
I would actually say Hades Town. It's a new one. I went and saw it in New York in October. It was amazing.
Cool.
Really
That's
good
really
music.
awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I know, well, I think, well, Drew's definitely met Marissa, but I don't know if you've met Marissa Nolia, but she's a huge
Yeah.
musical theater fan. So a lot of her kind of pizzazz comes into our duo because just of how passionate she is about that, and she
Yeah.
like loves Disney movies so hard. So we've got a lot of like that classical musical side a little bit blended into our duo, which is really cool. But
That's awesome.
yeah. So I have another little question here. What does a typical week look like in your guys's musicianship, I guess, like with practicing, shows, writing? What would you kind of say an average week looks like? So whoever wants to start first, feel free.
Well, I mean, there's two kinds of weeks. There's weeks beginning as of like a week ago, which is significantly different. So we're not meeting.
Yeah.
And then there's like our usual week. Our usual week of practice is, and it depends like where we are in the year too. So our kind of average, just not really doing a ton of, like in the winter, kind of our slower season. It's meeting twice a week, and we'll usually, recently we've been rehearsing about 8 o'clock until midnight, 1 or 2, depending on how much. Sometimes if we have a lot more to do, we'll meet at noon and go till the same hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of our usual slower week. And that'll be compounded with probably at least 2, sometimes 4 shows in the weekend, depending if we're on the road or not. In the summertime, we don't rehearse quite as much because we'll do more touring. We'll actually go 4 a week on the road. But on top of the rehearsals, everybody will be working at home on their own parts of the show. I'll usually be writing songs during the day and doing kind of administrative work before we meet up at night. So the work day is quite long, pretty much every day, weekend or weekday.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you guys have a band space that you play at, or is it somebody's house?
Yeah, we have a rehearsal space that we all meet
cool.
at.
Nice.
Yeah, because I myself have musicians in my basement. Basically my whole house is filled with roommates that are all musicians, which is a blessing, but also a curse because I always hear every production of every song being created, or I always hear like the band practicing, which most of the times I can kind of tune out, but it would be nice to have that option sometimes to be like, hey, they can go to the rehearsal space and go crazy there. So that's good to hear. Nolia, how would you say your week kind of looks in comparison?
Okay. So like a normal week, it's honestly every week is different for me, but I'm gonna say on average, I try and pick up my guitar daily, learn a new song, try and write a new song. When I was in school, I was in a music course, so I always had that hour and a half every day of writing, just practicing, which was great. So just on my own time, like it's just whenever I can fit it in. Like sometimes it'll be 11 o'clock at night. I'll lock myself in my room, play for an hour, or it might just be right after school. It all depends for me because just with school, I've had such a busy schedule. I haven't really had that set plans.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that naturally comes to once you're out of high school, and if you're still pursuing it, you'll kind of find your way. And even those, like I know with FKB, I think you guys still have some members that were in university fairly recently, if I'm correct. Okay. Yeah. So even them too, like they still have to manage their schedule, right? So it's just balancing, which is always hard. For
and the nice thing about being by yourself is that you don't have to schedule around other people.
Totally. Yeah. I can imagine, Drew, that it's pretty difficult to, I mean, I know your band's pretty committed, so they're probably pretty good at it, but still it would be hard to coordinate that all the time. I can imagine.
The way we've actually made it work is it used to be difficult. I did used to have to coordinate it, but the way we've made it work recently, and I can't imagine doing it this way without having this, is we basically just have the band's calendar is the master calendar. So I don't, these days I don't need approval from anybody to book shows unless there was already something scheduled. We need to talk about whether we need to move it or not. But like our calendar is the master calendar. Everyone plans around when we're doing shows. So we book the shows first. There's the odd time that's booked off for various reasons, but that's how we manage to. It makes it a lot easier because when 4 people have to have a discussion about if they can do the show or not, you're not going to be doing as many shows, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it would just take longer, which is not a good thing for sure, because you usually want an immediate response. I know, like as a booking talent agent kind of thing, if that's the like label you want to give myself, it's really difficult having people that take, and I find it more with bands, it can take up to 4 to 5 days for a response. I'm like, I get it, people don't use emails much, or you're just busy and you need all 4 yeses, but yeah, that would definitely be an advantage for sure, having kind of a set schedule for sure. And I know with myself and Marissa, that's something we've done too. We've really had to, kind of block out days and be like, Kate, these are our for sure meeting days. These are our for sure filming days. And it's, especially with, everything that's happening recently, it's been a lot easier to find time, but then more difficult because we had to completely readjust our kind of things we had planned. So, and I can understand it's difficult. What would you guys think are some traits, some qualities that a musician would have? So things like, I know we kind of said like self, I can't think of the word I'm trying to say, but you're very like motivated to yourself.
Motivated.
Yeah, but what other kind of qualities would you think musicians need to have or should have?
This is one that I don't know if it's as common, but I think one that over time musicians will build up, and I think it is an important trait, although this is probably one of the harder ones to develop, is just hardiness and resiliency to, because I mean, there's no easy road to making a career in music. There's so much rejection. There's so much, there's just so many bad things that will happen along the way that sure. I think that's a trait that I think a lot of people will pick up, but I think it's an important one. And if that's something that you can have going into it, I think that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What do you think, Nolia?
I definitely agree with that. Resilience. I would also say you definitely also have to be open to new ideas, open to new people. And then also you can't be afraid to make mistakes or to like experiment. So openness, I think, is also another big part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I really like that you mentioned, Drew, to the hardiness, because I think that really does set people back. What do you guys think are some, like when you face rejection, what do you think are some good ways you kind of cope and see it on a bright side, if you can, or if you will?
I guess I always kind of look at it as, I look at it one of 2 ways. One is I'll look at it and say, well, I mean, sometimes it just makes sense. Like a lot of times you'll be taking a long shot, and I mean, that's not a big deal. If someone doesn't want to work with you, it really doesn't mean that they'll never want to work with you again. It just means that there's a chance that what you're actually doing isn't at the level that they're working at, and that they don't have, it wouldn't be beneficial to them at the moment to work with you. But in a couple of years, even in a few months, sometimes that can completely change. And there's a lot of people that we work very closely with now who have previously, and I've found out recently from some that had previously heard from other people and decided they didn't want to work with us before, but now we're working very closely together, and that is nothing to do with them. That has to do with, we didn't get to the level where we were helpful to them until recently.
Right. Yeah. I actually, that's a very interesting concept, how when people hear just from different word of mouth, I think that really does set back a lot of musicians too, because they're not seeing firsthand kind of through their experience if something's helpful to them or if someone's useful to them. And I think I've learned just in the past that there's no harm in just trying it, right? So like if, for example, if there's someone you're like, I don't know if they're really a good match for what I'm trying to do, but just giving it a small trial run almost, and just seeing, and if you don't like it, you always have the ability to be like, this isn't working, or like, it sounds very obvious, but when you're kind of in the moment, it seems more difficult. But Nolia, what would you say about anything? It doesn't necessarily have to be music, but with like facing rejection, how do you find are some coping mechanisms to growing from it?
Okay, so I would just say whenever I face rejection, I just always try and look at it as almost a sort of like fuel, right? Okay, what do I need to improve on? How can I get better? Or why did they say no? And then, yeah, also sometimes it does make sense. But then also, I also try and look at it as like everything happens for a reason. Maybe this just wasn't the right fit. And instead of dwelling on it, just move on. There are probably better things coming your way. So I try not to dwell. It's
Yeah.
another one.
Well, that's a really good approach. Just, I mean, it's basically manifesting and just believing that eventually it'll just work out, which normally it does. It'll find itself anyways. This kind of question kind of relates to sort of the previous one. Have you ever considered quitting music? And if so, what did you learn from that moment of doubt? How did you grow from that moment, if you've had this moment before?
I don't really think I've had that moment. I've definitely had like doubts on how I want to pursue it. Like, do I want to go to school for it? Do I want to just try to do it on my own? But I've actually just always kind of had this like faith in music since I was like a little kid. So luckily I've been pretty good on that fact, but also we'll see what happens in a few years. So
you're like, I'm still young. I have time to doubt myself.
yeah.
Totally. What about you, Drew?
I've never like seriously considered it. Like, I mean, the thought crosses your mind every now and again, like especially when, you know, waking up after like a 3-hour sleep and, you know, wherever you are, like on the road and stuff. Like, I think those are the moments where it's like, is this worth it? And then, but like, it's never really, it's just once you get into the shows and you start, you know, talking to friends who are making music and like working with people who are in it, like it's just so motivating. I just never can, it's never something that seriously crosses my mind. I think it's just in passing. Sometimes like there'll just be a tough day and I'll be like, it could be so much easier if I wasn't doing this. But then you think like, well, what else would I do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I always come back to it.
I always think to myself too, I'm like, oh, like it'd be so much easier if I just worked as a nurse, or like if I just worked as like my dad always told me he wanted me to be a dental hygienist because it paid good money. And I always think to myself, like, if I had become that, yeah, I mean, I'd be making more money. But at the same time, there's other limitations, there's other restrictions that would eventually arise, right? Like you would get less hours or less time to do this and less time to be creative. And there's always those things that would come into play no matter what position or career you choose to be. I'm curious to know from other musicians, because every time I go to a live concert, I always feel a spark of like re-inspiration. Do you guys ever have that feeling, or is that just me?
For sure. I definitely get that feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know, just seeing different people perform and then just, it's inspiration. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I found this even last year when I went to, I think it was last year when I went to the EMAs, and I was with Marissa actually, and we were both talking just about just seeing other musicians just doing really well. And like, I know FKB was nominated, and there were so many incredible artists that performed that night. And I think just seeing, like, kind of like Drew said, when you see other people doing it, when you see other people at shows and you're talking and you're all like just excited about music in general, I think it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you hear like stories of other musicians and you see them successful now, but then you hear those stories of how they struggled and how they overcome it. So that's also very inspiring.
Yeah.
Because
gives you a bit of hope in when you feel lost at times. Yeah, I always find it interesting too, like a lot of like rap artists, they have these like super terrible upbringings and they always just find a way through it, which always seems like it would be impossible, but somehow, some way they figure it out. So yeah, beautiful. So before we sign off, do you guys have anything else you want to add about maybe or any inspiration or any tips for anyone who maybe wants to become a musician like yourselves?
My biggest one, what I always tell people is just throw yourself into it. Just jump in and do it. And I think that's one big thing. Like an example I always give is when we did our first US tour. Part of the reason we booked it was actually we were down a guitar player. We hadn't picked up Alex yet. Our other guitar player had just gotten married and moved to the US. So we were down a member. Basically as motivation, to get a new member, I started booking this big, like the biggest tour we were ever going, like that we'd ever done at that point. And we had no choice at that point. Like we had to get a member, and like sometimes just setting yourself a little trap can be, but like I say that I'll add a caution to that. Like don't set a trap that you can't get yourself out of. Like don't book a show that you're not ever going to be able to accomplish. Like we could have made it happen if we didn't pick up a member as a 3-piece, but it wasn't going to be quite as good. So we had that motivation to make it great.
Yeah, that's really cool. I really like that. It's like that saying where people are like, do one thing a day that scares you. Like as cheesy as it is, there is some relevance behind it. So how about you, Nolia? Before you sign off, is there any kind of wisdom or anything you kind of want to tell more about musical journeys?
Sure. I would just agree with Drew. Like, put yourself out there. I would say just don't be afraid to make mistakes. And don't be afraid to lean on others for support, because it's not the easiest industry to be in. But yeah.
Totally. I really like that. If I were to give any piece of advice, I mean, I'm not saying I have like the world's best knowledge to give, but I think just giving yourself, like we've talked about, just small goals to really accomplish. And the more you start to kind of tick off these tasks, like these small goals that you've accomplished, I think over time it really leads to kind of longevity and helping you feel like even if you're making these super small steps, you're still accomplishing a lot. I know a lot of artists have different goals, right? Like, and I even kind of mentioned like today, Nolia, you're kind of at your beginner level, and Drew's kind of like, he's 10 years into this music journey. So there's obviously different goals and things that everyone gets to. But I think at the end of the day, as long as you're making yourself happy and whatever your goal or whatever your realistic dream of being a musician is, whether that's touring across the world or if it's just playing local shows and just putting on really good sets and having a good fan base, I think no matter what, it's important, and you just have to kind of distinguish what your goals are. So that is all the time we have for today. Thank you guys again so much for being on. We had Drew from FKB, no worries, and Nolia as well. So I'm Millie Rouge from Vienna, Whyte. This has been our second episode of the Roundtable, where we talked about musical journeys. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube right now, you're liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell button so that you're notified for when these shows come out. So we'll be releasing our daily roundtables actually Monday to Friday. So I'll let you guys sign off, and then we're out for the day. So say your goodbyes.
Well, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for having me.
Beautiful.
Yeah, same here. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a great day, guys.
You too.
Bye.